Well, it's been a while since I've done an update on this car. This is a 66 Chrysler 300 that I rescued out of a field and sitting in grass up to its doors almost a year ago, and I've been slowly piecing it together since then. I put an engine in it and transmission combination, dropped those in, did a lot of detailing, fixed a few things on it, went through the brakes, went through the fuel system, had to rebuild the entire fuel system, new fuel tank, new lines, new pump, rebuilt the carburetor, and it's running pretty good now. I don't have it all the way there yet, but it's come along well. And last major thing on it is put the exhaust on, get the exhaust repaired on it, because it's really rotted and coming apart and got all kinds of holes in it from about where the door is on back, so it sounds loud and rough, sounds like a dump truck. So that's coming, but the issue with that is I have to drive it down there, which is about 16 or 17 miles one way, and so far I just haven't really felt like this car's up to that. I've had it out driving it around a little bit on the road and stuff. That's why I haven't really taken you guys with me, because I'm just not all the way there with it yet. So it's just got a few things going on that made me choose to not go to the exhaust shop yet. So I thought I would run through that and kind of show you what's going on with it. Nothing major, just little stuff basically. So this is a 383, 4-barrel 383 engine. I think this particular engine is a 67, car's a 66, but for all intents and purposes it is identical to what it had in it originally. So it's a 4-barrel carburetor, so we're going to look at that in a minute. That's one of the subjects of this video. But before that, I want to just kind of tell you about a couple of things I had to deal with on it. One of them was I had leaking valve cover gaskets. I told you about that. I got that fixed. Just had to take the valve covers back off and straighten them out. They had the screw holes where people torqued down on them with all they got, had indented the screw holes where the bolts go through, so the mounting, the flange surface was no longer flat. So that little spot there at each of those five, I think it's got, let's say 5 or 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think this one's got on it actually, yeah. Each of those 6 bolt hole areas were bent in, so it just wasn't sealing. So I had to go back and flatten those out with a hammer and then seal the valve cover gaskets to the, I had to run a bead. What I did is ran a bead of sealer around and use that, what I call the yellow snot stuff. It's the little 3M adhesive. It's pretty good stuff for this. You can see a little bit poking out right there, I think. Let's see if I can get you some light down in there. It's kind of, yeah. So did that, and I went ahead and threw each one of them on while that stuff was still tacky, so it would conform. So what I wanted it to do is I wanted it to, we knew the head surface was flat, so I wanted to make sure, put it on while it had time to fill in the dips and stuff. So it seems to have worked pretty good. And so that stopped the oil leaks. And what I had going on after that was a little bit tougher to deal with, and that's over here at the power steering gearbox. I just shined this flashlight right in my face, man. And if you're looking down in there, this is the valve body, what they call the valve body on the top of the steering gear housing. And I already had to deal with this thing once where that line goes in. The one that was on this steering box originally, the gearbox I guess you could call it, had water in it. They left the lines open, and I had a feeling that was going to be trouble, and it was. And so what happened was I was warned by my YouTube friend Howard Smith, who's on here as Old Car Alley, to not have my hands on the steering wheel when I started this thing up the first time. And so I took his advice, and sure enough, when I started the engine up and got it running the first time, you may remember in that video, it went hard left, and it was trying to steer so hard to the left that it was making the power steering belt squeal and slip. So I had to take that. I took the original one off, and I thought I made a video of it, but I think the file got corrupted, so I didn't get to show you that. But it's just got a spool valve in it, like I said, a valve body for a valve body, and a transmission slides back and forth sort of in there and gives you a direction of effort or steering assist. And it was seized, and when I took the thing apart, I got it unseized. It was pitted. The housing was pitted, so it was not usable. So that was junk. So I got the one off the car, I parted out and used it, and I went through the procedure to set this correctly so that it would not try to self-steer one way or the other. And basically, essentially what that entails is you tighten it down just to the point where it's just barely snug against the top of the gearbox with those two bolts there that you see. And let's get you down in there. There's one on each side, of course. Light. We have some light, maybe not. There we go. Anyway, two bolts. And then you start the engine up. Keep your hands clear of everything, and then you watch what the steering wheel does. And this one, I think, tried to steer just a little bit to the left, very slowly. So I just took a little hammer and I tapped one way or the other on that thing. I think it's actually up and down, but tapped it down or up or whichever it was, till it did not try to steer either way with it running at idle. So that's got that and tightened it down. It's been good ever since now. I don't know how long that steering box is going to hold up. I mean, it's had water in it, so who knows. But I had a leak down here, and at first I thought it was the common place to look. I thought it was this pressure line fitting there. That's the pressure line with the metal on the top. But come to find out, it was not. It was this line here, which is kind of coming down and around right there, and then it goes down into the pump. That's the return. It's a huge return line on these. But if you look down in there, you see something that's kind of orange looking, bronze, copper colored deal right there. What that is sorry for the shaky camera, I'm just a shaky person these days. That's a copper washer. It's a huge one. It's the only one I could get the right size in my stash of stuff. That seals, there's a fitting there. There's a metal fitting like a tube that screws into this assembly right here, and it seals with that washer. And I tried to reuse that washer, and it's just the same thing as when you try to reuse a copper washer on a brake line. It don't ever work because it takes a set and it gets ridges in it and marks in it, and it'll leak. And that's what that one did. That one actually leaked with no pressure on it. So it leaked everywhere and leaked, and finally I had to take it apart, put a new washer in it, and it seems to be dried up now. So good. But that was not the end of the leaks. When I got this thing going and was driving it around some and had the radiator cap locked down, somebody told me to buy one of those flip up top radiator caps. No. If your car's working right, you don't ever have to take the radiator cap off with it hot anyway. That's only when you got something wrong with it and the thing's overheating or whatever. Anybody knows not to take the cap off a hot radiator. So anyway, but what was going on was I got out here and looked at it, and I think I showed you a little blurb in the video there on back. This thing was bubbling right there under the cap right here, and all that globbed up solder from my poor soldering ability with this was not there, and it was just a seam like that. And so evidently that's got solder in it. It's not supposed to be like that, like I did it, but like I said, I'm a hack as far as that stuff goes. So this radiator was the one that came out of that burned Fury convertible, and it took a lot of heat right here, like so much that it has scorched the paint on this core support that was in there. So I figure what happened is it just got the radiator just hot enough that it started melting a little bit of the solder in there, and just created a pinhole. So finally I think I got it sealed up, and I'm going to find out. I guess I have to. That's my philosophy. I just keep doing it over and over and over again until I get it done the right way. So if that leaks again, I'll do it again, and I'll just spend hours and days and weeks cleaning and resoldering that radiator neck till I fix it the right way. That's all I can do. I ain't taking it to the radiator shop. That'd be embarrassing. That's all they're gonna do, solder it up. So that's a lost art. Everybody has these kind of radiators. They say, oh, it's gonna leak. I guess I get a new one. Let's solder the thing up. That's what they do at the radiator shop. The problem with these radiators, this is an aftermarket radiator. You know what time it is. Landlord's coming home time. The doggy alarm clock, or alarm. But this was explained to me by a radiator shop, and they weren't trying to sell me a radiator. They're just explaining why these are hard to repair, because this is brass up here, I guess it is, and this is a lot thinner than the original. This is not the original radiator. I have the original radiator. It's over there. Condition unknown, but if you pick this radiator up and pick that one up, you can tell there's a big difference in the weight of them. So anyway, but I'm going to use it because it doesn't look like it's very old as far as use. So that's that. So we got leaks developed and leaks stopped, we hope, because I can't stand leaks. You guys, I don't know, maybe I've kind of explained this already, but the reason why my pace seems to be kind of glacial at some of the points is that I'm just kind of OCD about stuff, and I don't like leaks. I don't like, stuff not working right. So it's just going to take as long as it takes for me to get it right, because when everything's done and I'm finished with my work on it, I want to just get in, start it up, and roar away, and not have to worry about something puking antifreeze or oil or power steering fluid or what have you. So this leads me to the final and most challenging issue this car has developed in the short time that I've been running it around, and not one that I expected. Well, I didn't expect, I was hoping I wouldn't have it, and talked about my rushing through stuff. I rushed through some things to get this car together, and I had to go back and redo it. So that was the valve covers and all that other stuff. So every time I've gotten in a hurry about doing something here, I've had to go back and redo it. So same with this carburetor. The carburetor is working okay as far as how the carburetor is functioning. I mean, I don't believe there's a problem with the carburetor itself, because it starts easy when it's cold and it runs good when it's warmed up. But the problem is that, let me tell you what happened. I kept noticing that when I would run the car and then stop the engine and let it sit a while, like a half hour, an hour and a half, something like that, I'd come back to start it back up, and it would really be kind of difficult to start. Well, I don't know, I guess I wouldn't say difficult, but it would just take longer to start, instead of it just turning over like near and starting up and running like the other one does out there, the Plymouth cold or hot. This one would, when it was heat soaked like that, it would just and then it'd finally start, so that's not right. But I left it outside, so I really, every time I didn't really pay much attention to it. But the other night I backed it in where it's at right here, and then went in, and the engine was hot. I'd taken it down the road and back. And I came back out about 45 minutes later, and as somebody on YouTube once described it, I came in here and I smelled a strong gasoline-like odor, which can only be, of course, gasoline. So I went looking under the tank. No leaks back here. Got up to the engine, and there's just gas fumes like crazy up here, but nothing's leaking out here that I could see, not around the engine. So I took the air cleaner off and looked in here, and the first thing I noticed was, when I came over here, there was all kinds of gas inside the carburetor. What the heck? Here, and hang on a second, let me open that choke up. All right, all kinds of gas up in here, down in the throat of the carburetor, like where that thing with the two tubes is right there. That's the accelerator pump discharge port. It was coming out of there. There was gas up in those. That's a high-speed air bleed right there. That thing with the tube end right there you're looking at, that's not supposed to have gas in it. So these are air bleeds also. I think those might be idle air bleeds. And I had seen evidence down here that there'd been fuel leaking on the manifold, staining, and it was wet. So on the throttle shaft. So obviously this thing had been leaking quite a bit. The fuel out, and it was percolating. I could hear it perking in there. So long story short is this thing had got, this carburetor got so hot the fuel started percolating in it, and you know, they call it fuel boiling or percolating, whatever. So it had done that, but you know, I couldn't explain why in the world was there so much doggone fuel up here. You know, the only way that could happen is if it had, like, the float bowls had overfilled. So I thought about this and thought about it, and I did a little bit of research on the internet to find out what could be going on with this thing, why it's doing that. And there's a couple things going on with it. First thing is the reason why, probably the reason why the fuel level had raised itself up so much was due to the, well, everything is due to the design of this carburetor. This is a Carter AFB. This is a successor to the WCFB, which is an early Carter 4-barrel, and then that was before the AVS and before the thermoquad, and this is the one that this carburetor is based on. This is an Edelbrock, aftermarket Edelbrock carburetor. So I've done a lot of studying on this and thinking about this and researching it, and what I believe is going on is the reason for the first thing is the deal with the fuel being so high in the float bowls, like the fuel not cutting off with the floats, is my guess at this, I'm guessing at it because I haven't opened this thing up and I haven't done anything to test this theory, but this carburetor has individual floats on it. It has one over here and it has one over here, and they are not connected physically. So you got one small float here, one small float here. You got a needle here, needle and seat here, needle and seat here. They're separate. And then you got a small float bowl on each side of the carburetor. So what I believe is going on is causing that problem is that, of course, there's some residual fuel pressure in the fuel lines when you shut it off. All right, well, if that fuel is boiling or percolating, it means it's kind of bubbling like a witch's, you ever seen on some funny show, a witch's brew or something. That's what the fuel's probably doing. And what happens is you have something called float bounce. That means that when this stuff is bubbling in there, the fuel's bubbling, and the float is like bouncing up and down, and you got a needle valve on top of it that's supposed to be cutting it off, the flow of fuel off, but it's bouncing so much that it's letting the fuel just go like bloop, 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 and then finally, at some point, it gets so far up the fuel, it starts puking it out that accelerator pump discharge. It's not supposed to do that, but it managed to, and it's coming up those air bleeds. So all that's wrong. That's not supposed to ever happen normally. You know, the float, when the fuel level gets high enough, the float's supposed to cut it off. But I think the simple design of this carburetor is vastly contributing to that. So that's that. So I think we got float problems with the seats, and they're not got dirt in them. I don't mean that. I don't mean they're defective. They're working correctly for what they're supposed to do, but this deal with the fuel boiling is like causing them to do something they're not supposed to. In other words, that's kind of a stupid way of putting it. I'm gonna be right back. So anyway, we got that going on with that. That's what I feel like is happening. So it's filling the carburetor up way too full of fuel with that. And then the second thing is that's causing all this probably is the fact that the carburetor is getting too hot, and this is part of my issue that I caused probably, and then it's probably just again the design of the carburetor. So the carburetor is sitting right on this intake, as you can see, obviously. But what happened was when I put this carburetor on, I used the gasket that came with the kit. And I had thoughts about that. I thought, I hope this is going to work with the heat, and it hasn't. But there's the gasket right there. I'll zoom in for you. Put the cameras. Okay, you see that gasket down there? You see how thin that is? That is a paper thin gasket. It's this thing right here. That's the gasket right there. All right, so this carburetor, the way this carburetor is made is that you have Two pieces make up the entire carburetor. You've got the carburetor body, which is this part here, which has got the float chambers, float bowls in it, got the venturi, it's got the butterflies down here with the throttle shafts and all that, and then the gasket, and then you have the air horn up here. So it's the only two pieces there are to one of these AFBs or an AVS carburetor. And that's unusual because most carburetors have a separate base plate down here that's got a gasket, pretty thick gasket separating it from the carburetor body. This one does not. This is one big chunk of zinc or aluminum, whatever it's made out of. So, but essentially it's sitting on this, it's a big flat carburetor, and it's sitting on this intake. So it's just, heat is just, it's absorbing heat like crazy, like a heat sink. S-I-N-K, not S-Y-N-C, heat sink. So that's what's going on. So I put the wrong gasket on this thing, and that didn't help anything either. And then another thing I found was when I put this fuel line on, the fuel line, the metal fuel line, is right against the valve cover. And it goes down there. Now it's in the airstream down there, but up here it's right on the valve cover, so it's absorbing heat. And I don't know if there's much I can do about that. I guess there is. Need to raise that up. I can adjust it down there, it looks like. So I'm going to try to do that. See, it's against this thing down here too, almost. Yeah, it is against it. Right against it, right there. So two places the metal fuel line is against the engine with no airspace in it. So that was where I flubbed that up myself. So basically it's been a comedy of errors on this thing. So I've decided I'm going to try a couple things to try to alleviate this problem, because I don't want to have to smell gas all the time and have gas boiling in the carburetor if I can help it. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. And let me preface that by saying, you know, the first thing people is going to fall out of people's mouths, and they're going to say, what's this gas we're using this day and age? It's ethanol gas. I don't buy that because, no pun intended, I do buy it, but I don't believe that's the entire problem. I believe it may contribute to a little bit. But if that was the problem, then this truck would be giving problems, which it's not. And this Plymouth out here, the brown one, would be giving problems, which it's not. Both of those behave perfectly in hot weather. They don't do any of that. The bird flying out there. So I don't buy that argument. Yeah, it's not great gas. And alcohol, if anything, the thing about that, the boiling fuel thing, where that argument does not hold up, is that alcohol by itself and that gas, if they do anything when subjected to heat, they evaporate. They turn to vapor and they're gone, because you can take that gas, and if the concrete's hot out here, you can pour a half a cup of gas out here, the ethanol gas, out on this concrete, with it being 90 degrees out here, and in about 2, 3, 4 minutes it's gone, it's evaporated like it went in there. So the original gas didn't do that. The original gas, it would, but it took a lot longer. But this stuff should evaporate. So the boiling deal, that's something else. That's too much heat. That's all that is. So anyway, I had to come up with an idea about how to deal with this. So I'm going to explain to it. I haven't implemented my ideas yet because I got parts coming, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I'm going to do. First thing is I had to come up with a heat insulator. So I went looking through all my insulators and thick carburetor gaskets. I didn't have any to fit that, because there's 4 types of 4-barrel flange pipes. There's the early square bore. I know they call a lot of stuff these days square bore carburetors like that, but that's technically not what you call them. Square bore is the early 4-barrel stuff, like a WCFB, early WCFB, and early Rochester 4G, and some other oddball stuff. So it's a real small pattern, bolt pattern. And then you have the AFB pattern, which is that one. And then you have the Holly pattern, which is this. And then you have a spread bore, which is this. So I had to go looking to see. At first I had to measure everything to see what bolt pattern I had. And I have the AFB pattern bolt pattern, which, and this is going to confuse you because it confused me. First thing I had to understand, make myself understand, was I knew what my bolt pattern was, so I had a misguided idea that I had some sort of weird carburetor that used a weird pattern. That's not the case. It uses the majority AFB bolt pattern, which is I'll show you here. Never mind that this is a spread bore. We're looking at strictly the bolt pattern. This is the bolt pattern of the carburetor that's on my car now. This is the ones that the single 4 barrels used in the 60s and the dual 4s in the 60s used, like 65 on down. So if it had an AFB on it during those years up to about 66, it used this bolt pattern. So you're looking at it from the front to the back. So it's more narrow left to right than it is front to rear. So I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but it's like a 4. It's a little over a 4 1/4, whatever that measurement is. 4 and I'm so bad with fractions, I suck at fractions. But anyway, you can see that's the 2 front bolts, center to center, same as the back. And then you come here to the side, and it is 5 5 5/8, I think, is this distance front to rear. So the type of holes in it notwithstanding, that's the pattern. So I knew I had an AFB pattern, so I found a phenolic spacer for the early AFB pattern, and it's on the way. So it's a 1/4 inch phenolic spacer, so that should help all that out. It's a 4-hole deal, and I'm real happy about that. I thought I'd have a hard time finding that, but did not. So you have that, and then you may say, well, this is a spread bore spacer that I got from somewhere. Why has it got that pattern on it if that's an AFB pattern? Well, they use the same as an AFB, but of course this won't fit. This won't not near fit that car over there. No way, because the holes are spaced out, the bores are wider every direction, so that's no way. It'll never fit. The only thing similar between the two is the spacing. This would physically, if I took that carburetor off over there, this would physically fit down on it on the studs. That's it. So it's can't use that. So I have this one, but here's the rub on this. This is the Edelbrock version of that carburetor. This is the one that Weber eventually ended up with the rights on. This is one that so many small block Chevys across this nation have on them, even though most of the majority of those never came with this carburetor. Every car show you get is like a 100-car advertisement for Edelbrock carburetors, but people love these things and they use them. But this one has the dual pattern. This is a you look here, 2 holes on each corner. Do you know why there's 2 holes on each corner? Because there's 2 different patterns. That means that this carburetor, this is why people love them, I guess. This carburetor will fit that car over there because it has both the narrow pattern inside holes. Sorry, I said narrow pattern, which is that hole, that hole, that hole, and that hole. That's that small one I just measured for you. It also has the holly. I forgot to mention that, but the holly pattern is the wider one. So if you have a holly, that's the outside hole. So this fits either of those, but this I know is not an AFB pattern. This is a holly pattern, square bore, so to speak, base gasket. So if we put this up to this, you can see that it fits the outside holes, right? So if you had a manifold that takes a holly, this carburetor would fit it. If you have a manifold that takes an AFB, early one like that one, it would fit it. It's got 2 different sizes. So here's something fun. If we take this spacer, which we know has the AFB pattern I just told you about, the small pattern, and we put it up to this, look at that. It's going to fit exactly. But look how off the holes are in there. That'll never work, never ever. So anyway, this is a sort of a confusing but fascinating little primer on these carburetors, what fits what. So this is pretty, I guess this is a good thing for these carburetors, is they do fit just about anything. They, you know, Yeah, they won't fit a spread bore, obviously. So if you have an intake that had a quadrajet or a thermoquad or one of those Motorcraft 4300 series 4 barrels on it, you'd have to use an adapter. But otherwise, if you got a Holly or whatever, or an AFB, it'll go on there. So just have to make sure the throttle blade's clear. So you may be asking yourself, like I did, well, if this carburetor is based on an AFB, then how come it fits a Holly? Well, it's just the way they did it. I don't know that this carburetor here has 2 holes on it or not. Let's go look and see. On each corner. It does on that side. It does not on that side. That's a little bit of Chrysler up yours. So it ain't gonna fit no. See, it's got one. I guess you could modify it. It's got one up back there, and it's probably got one over there. Let me feel it. Nope, it does not. So that's crazy. See, that's the type of stuff that it makes me think that these engineers that designed all this stuff or spec'd it or whatever they did, whatever part they had their hands on, they had too much time on their hands. Instead of just going ahead and drilling all the extra bolts, they put one extra one here, one outside one over there, one outside one over here, and not one there and not one there. Who does that? So anyway, the last thing I want to tell you about what I'm going to do about the float situation, and this Edelbrock has the exact same floats in it. It's identical. So you got the fuel inlet in the same place and everything. I could put this Edelbrock carburetor right on there. I'm not, but I don't need to. But what do you do about that? If your floats are bouncing in the fuel, if the fuel's bubbling, well, I'm thinking to myself, well, I may not be able to solve that fuel boiling all the way, but I want to keep it from filling the float bowls up. So what I'm going to do is I got a set of what they call off-road needles and seat assemblies for one of these, or one of those original AFBs will fit either one, or an AVS, and it's spring loaded. It means it has a plunger in it, it's got a spring below it, and then it pushes up on the needle itself. So what happens is it's got spring pressure against it, so the float can be, they say it's for off-road or marine applications is what they use it for now. That's what they sell it for, but I think it was originally equipped in some of these old carburetors. As a matter of fact, I think when I took that carburetor apart, those were in there. They were either in that one or they were in that AVS that I rebuilt a couple of years ago. I think it was in the AVS, but it had them originally. So they keep spring pressure on the needle, so the needle stays up there and stays closed, even though the float's doing this crap down here. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that between those two, that's going to cure all this. If it doesn't cure it, it should minimize it where I can live with it. You know, they got away from, I guess Carter finally realized that this, with the increasing, when they started smogging these engines and doing stuff to them and they were running hotter and hotter, they started realizing that this carburetor design just wasn't going to hack it because it was, too much hot start problems. So that's when they introduced the thermoquad, which is the one that's got the aluminum base plate and it's got the plastic float bowl, and then it's got the aluminum top on it. So that, I don't think I've ever heard of a thermoquad having those kind of, it's called thermoquad. So I have never heard of one of those having those problems. So, if nothing fixes this and this issue renders this thing kind of undrivable, I have a plan B on this. I don't want to do it, but I still have the spread bore 383 manifold that came off this engine, so I could put a thermoquad on it if I had to. If my hand is forced on it, I hope it's not. I'm gonna try everything. I'm gonna try those two fixes on it and see if this will work. And this car doesn't have a temperature gauge on it either, so I'm gonna put a temperature gauge on it and make sure it's not trying to run hot. Hell, that radiator could be bad. I don't think it is, but it could be. It doesn't smell hot. So last thing I want to talk about, this thing is getting too long, but I was going to try to fix the emblem on the back to the trunk emblem, so I took the thing off. And the first thing that happened was the top of it fell off because it had been JB welded back together. So you get over here in front of you. Like that. So that was, whichever way it goes, I think it goes like this. But regardless, it's broken. And turned it over, and this thing's already been into before. Somebody has put different pieces of plastic in it, and JB welded them in and all that. So this part up here is missing. The segment's missing up there, and if you ever look at the original, it's got a piece of plastic in it that says 300 on it. So I guess I'm gonna be soaked out of 60 bucks or 70 bucks to find a replacement emblem, because I'm not dealing with that. I'm gonna try to put that back together. I got better things to do. So anyway, the most important thing is we'll get the emblem back on. We'll deal with that other stuff. Nah, that's first. So anyway, guys, I want to give you an update on this and let you know what was going on. Some folks that asked about it, and I didn't want you to think that I had given up or forgot about it or wasn't interested anymore. It's just, you know, just a few things got to be worked through for carefree, pleasurable driving with this. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll come back with more on this, give you an update, and hopefully the update is just going to be a shorter one, that it's just basically me saying everything's fixed. So thanks for watching. See you down the road.